How's it going, everyone, and welcome back to Lawbeck for another episode of our Friday drives. Now today I'm very lucky to be driving this beautiful 812 Ferrari Superfast. With the exterior of the car, this beautiful long bonnet. Firstly, the electro blue, I absolutely love it, and coupled with the yellow brake calipers, I'm a huge fan of. On the front end, you can see some of the aerodynamic winglets. They're all in carbon fiber. This car is filled with options. I'm going to showcase that to you now. As we head round the side, you know, that beautiful Cavallino on the side there in the yellow kind of pairs nicely with the brake calipers as well. Those beautiful alloys, carbon ceramic brakes as well. We're going to move our way all the way through. Little black exterior pack in here. As we open up the interior, that side guard with the Ferrari is all in carbon fiber as well, and the interior we'll get into in a little bit, but there's carbon fiber everywhere in this thing, and it's all taken from that Formula One technology that Ferrari use every single year with their Formula One cars, and it's always impressive to see how that transitions into the real thing. Now, coming all the way into the back, I'm going to open up the boot now. Even to the point where we've got carbon as the boot lid here. There's been no expense spared with this car, and if you just come over a little bit, if you can see that on the back of the car here and on the front in certain vehicles like the F8 that we drove not long ago, you actually have an options list here, but look how extensive that is. Now, some of them only last 2 or 3 points, but this one has absolutely everything on it, and it's super impressive. You know, it's a well-spec'd car. I think the color's fantastic, and I can't wait to drive it now. Now we're actually driving in the car, just sort of taking in my surroundings a little bit, and I've set my seating position, which I'm very happy with. My hands are in a nice place. The ergonomics of the car are really good, and recently I did a bit of a tour with Ferrari on a cavalcade event in big high country, and there was a lot of cars on the tour, and a lot of us were chatting, which car would we do a tour of that description? No track stuff, but just driving through some beautiful roads, fast stuff. We did some VMAX runs on an airfield, did all sorts of really fun and cool things. What would be the car to pick? And actually I said one of these, an 812 Superfast. And there was a few of them there. There was also one of the 812 Superfast Apertas, which is a beautiful car. The Aperta has a little bit more aerodynamics, a slightly more improved engine, a bit more track focused, and this car in particular had like a brushed aluminium finish, which was just stunning, and you can't quite appreciate how incredible this thing was. That finish was until you actually see it in person. You can see like the brush strokes in the aluminium as it's been forged and all that sort of stuff. It was very cool. But we all sort of came to the conclusion that an 812 Superfast would be the car to have. But why is that? The majority of the reason is because it's comfortable. Now, when you're doing a long drive, some sports cars, depending on how you're feeling, can be a little bit uncomfortable to drive a lot of the time. Now, even though we've got slightly sportier seats in this model, it's super comfortable. I could go all day in this thing and be happy. One thing that helps with that is we've got like a little button on here, which is a suspension button. And what this actually does, it doesn't stiffen the suspension, it does actually quite the opposite. It smoothens the ride and has like a bumpy road feel to it. So we've got bumpy road, then we've got our race, and then we've got the extra sort of modes, if you will, so we can have it in our wet setting, in our sports setting, and our race setting as well on the Manatino on the right hand side here, which having that bumpy road setting is really important. But another sort of added bonus to that is that in this car, which not all Ferraris have, we've got the lift kit. You can kind of see how it lifts up, come to a speed bump, that sort of thing, slightly different sort of style of road, and you can just lift it up, make sure you don't scrape the underneath of your car, because there's nothing worse than buying a really beautiful, expensive, exotic car like this and being worried about scraping the underneath all the time. You have to worry about it now. It lifts up way more than you might think, and it also adds to that feeling of comfortability with the car and the drive that you might be on, where you don't have to change your driving style to suit the car. So we've got the 6.5 litre V12 engine. in the front of this car, and it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. It's smooth, it's direct, it's so fast. You know, 0 to 100 is 2.9 seconds, top speed of about 325 kilometers an hour, which, I mean, realistically, we're not getting to that speed. We did a VMAX run in some of these cars, and people were just touching the tip of 300 k's an hour, which is just warp speed. You know, like, and most people don't go over, let's say 110 for legal reasons. You're given an open freeway or a racetrack, and all of a sudden this thing's doing north of 300 kilometers an hour. You start to realize how fast you're really traveling in that moment. It's quite impressive, really. For a car that's also, you know, it's not the lightest thing in the world either. It's a little bit of a heavier car. A big V12 engine, that goes a long way for the weight distribution. But what it does do, it allows that power delivery to be so smooth, that great weight balance. It allows the car to really just take off so quickly that I wouldn't even be able to get the most out of it on the roads that we're driving on. I'm gonna put it in manual mode for a little bit. I want to get a feel of the drive, just play around with the gears just a little bit. The auto system, even in race, it sits in such a high gear to make it comfortable. Whereas now I'm in a situation where I want to hear the noise. As I accelerate, I want to hear it. As I come off, I want to hear the burble of the exhaust system, that V12 engine kicking in. And just how quickly it changes gear, it's instant. As soon as you flick the paddle here, it just changes instantly. And that's something that sometimes in older Ferraris, that gearbox, or a Lamborghini, some of those older cars, the gearbox was just so late, cumbersome. You change gear and there'd be this big delay, but you almost feel like you're stopping. Whereas this now, you just hear the engine and really feels like it's slowing you up as it punches into the gear. And that's the feeling that I want when I'm driving something like this. That's that feeling that comes into it. The 812 also comes in a GTS model, so rather than the coupe that we're in now, it's a hard top, but it's a foldable roof that's kind of almost like a Targa top in some ways, if you will, just as a comparison visually. You've also got the Competizione, which is a little bit more track focused, and then the Competizione Aperta, which is then the track focused version, but that's the soft top instead of the GTS. So you get the best of both worlds. If you want something that's a little bit more relaxed like this in the 812, then great. If you want the soft top, then also great. But also then you want the sort of more track focused version, a little bit more raw, a bit faster, a bit more aerodynamics, but you also want the soft top as well, then you get that with the Aperta. The Competizione and the Aperta were completely sold out so quickly. All the allocations went very fast. But the 812, the build numbers were just fantastic. And it was a car that once it got released in 2017, people just wanted them so badly. And they were such a brilliant car for when they came out that it changed the face of the way that Ferrari was sort of producing their vehicles. It was something a little bit different. It reminds me a little bit of the Roma, but just a little bit more refined, a little bit more raw, a bit more powerful as well. The Roma is a fantastically pretty car, but the 812 for me is the pick of that bunch, that longer front end. Think of other cars like the AMG GTR. It's a fantastic car. I've raced the GT3 and the GT4 version. I've spent a lot of time in those cars, but there's something about this, there's something about the Ferrari prancing horse that just ignites a bit of emotion and history inside you that goes, this would be my pick. And I feel what this car does really well in comparison to, let's say, the GTR. I feel like I could drive this a bit more every day. The GTR, as fantastic as it is, I found it harder to drive as a daily. Whereas I could daily this all year long. It's just comfortable. I just sit here, I could do this all day. This car also, with its options list, has the reverse and front camera, which I think on a car this long, this big, is really important. It was well thought through by the person that spec'd it. One, with the beautiful color, the calipers in the yellow, just to contrast with that blue, amongst other things. But what it's done really well is those little things that add to the driving experience go a long way for what, you know, ultimately the person driving it needs. And if it can deliver that, that's why these options lists are so important, because, you know, ultimately it helps the resale value, it helps that car. And actually this is a car that I think we've seen from new holding in, if not going up in value. So almost an investment at this point, where they're not crazy over what a new one is, but they're getting to that point where you're going to start seeing them creep up in value more and more, and that can only be a good thing. One thing to also add, that in 2017 when this car was released, it was actually the first Ferrari that had EPS, electronic power steering. Traditionally, Ferraris have been very analog, very manual, very heavy in the wheel, but so responsive, whereas with this, they transitioned, and you can see that from the preceding models that have come out since. You think about the 296 GTB as an example, also has the same system. Obviously for that car is a hybrid, slightly different in its origins, but it uses the same system. And personally, I don't think you're missing anything from having that in the cars now in comparison to the more historical models. It allows the car to dictate what you want, but also, you know, there's a reason why we have these different settings. I go into our wet setting, it's going to be a little bit lighter, and then I head into our race setting, and it's going to be a little bit more responsive, be able to dictate where I want the car to go a little bit more as you're driving, and that can only be a good thing. Like, customizability is really important, and I feel like I have that in abundance with this car. I'm actually driving just in first gear because I was curious to know when these shift lights had come up, and it comes up about 5,500 RPMs in first gear at about 50 k's an hour, which kind of tells you how much extra you're gonna need to actually get to the, I'm doing 60 k's just under in first gear, and it's at 6,000 RPM, and these shift lights have only just come up. I changed gear now because we don't need to be in that lower gear, but it was one of those things where you're looking at it and you go, there's nothing cooler than parking up, ready to go onto a motorway, and you get to the end of it, start pulling up, and just see these shift lights come up, and just go, yeah, that's cool. But I'm just thinking to myself, you'd only be in second gear by the time you got to 100 anyway, so it wouldn't even make much of a difference. But that's why these things are so cool. They're so capable that most people won't get anywhere near the surface of what they can do. But when you do, you take it onto a circuit, you take it for a nice drive through some country roads, you will have so much fun. And I'm going down Beach Road, and every single person nearly has had a look at this car, because not just because it's a Ferrari, but I just think the color combination does so much for it as well. Just something to add in here, something I am just a huge fan of, and it's something really, really little, but I just think it's so cool. It's the red, white, and green for the launch button, the auto button, and then the reverse button. Just that Italian flag, that heritage, that history just seeped into the car all the time. It's no wonder Ferrari is such a massive brand, but it's not just because of history. I've driven a lot of the current spec cars, a lot of the older spec cars, and been very fortunate enough to experience a lot of these different things, and there's just something about the brand that goes a very long way. And if you didn't see our video on the F8, make sure you go check it out. But a story sticks with my mind. I went to the Ferrari factory with my family, with my dad, my mum, my brother, and some family friends. And you get to Maranello, and it's Ferrari is the place. And I'm trying to make sense of it, but everything they do is centered around it. It's the history, it's family, it's, you know, even the origins of Enzo and his passion for the brand, and the tragedy of his son passing away in a race and giving him the motivation to do it for him, to the point where, as I'm walking around the museum, there's a wall of all the drivers that have ever raced for Ferrari. And as I'm reading the wall, I've noticed a few names that I recognize. You think of so many greats: Michael Schumacher, Sebastian Vettel, there's countless names. And as I'm walking along, I saw my grandfather's name up there, and I said to my dad, I don't remember Jack ever driving for Ferrari. And he didn't. He never drove for Ferrari. But what actually happened was, the reason why my grandfather started his own race team was because Enzo Ferrari asked him to go and race for him. He wanted him to go and race for Ferrari. And he turned around to Enzo and said, actually, do you know what? I'd rather go and beat you. And that was his motivation. But it just shows how large Ferrari is, because no one else ignited that feeling for him of, I've got to beat them, more than Ferrari. Particularly in that period as well. You think the 50s and 60s, how steeped in history those drivers were, the likes of Phil Hill, competing against these legends of the sport, world champions. It was the motivation of Enzo saying to him, I want you to drive for me, that went, no, I'd rather go and beat you in my own thing. For him to create his own team, his own brand, his own car. And fortunate for him, with his ability and the help of Ron Turonak, to build such a car like the BT19, which I've been very lucky enough to drive on a few occasions, gave him the opportunity to go and beat Ferrari. And that was one of his greatest quiet successes, if you will, because there's probably not that many people who know about that situation either. But it just shows the history that this brand that I'm sitting in now has, where they're the gold standard for winning and success and lifestyle and luxury. And even you look now in Formula One today, the pressure that is on Ferrari, it's not just a group of fans that like the brand. It's a whole nation that get behind these drivers, this team, these people, to will them on to succeed. And Charles Leclerc not long ago won the Italian Grand Prix at Monza, and you see the scenes, the flares going off, the flags, the atmosphere. There's nowhere else that does that for one brand. And it just showcases how special these cars really are.